The views discussed in this conversation are the views of individuals and not of Arrington Capital. This podcast is provided solely for informational purposes and is not financial, legal, tax, or investment advice. The participants of this podcast are not recommending any particular security, protocol, token, financial instrument, or other tradable asset or any investment strategy. It is not offering to sell or soliciting to buy any security or asset.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Pirate Pod from Arrington Capital. Today, we have a very different guest with us. We're taking a slight deviation from our usual lineup of crypto founders, and Todd Hollow-Bist is joining us. He is a founder of his own company, but it focuses on Ph.D. level psychology for business leaders at a variety of different types of companies all over the world. I'm a participant in this program myself. It's been a very unique experience, learning about human dynamics, self-exploration, awareness, and the connections we have to each other. Like all of our podcasts, we're going to start by having our guest speaker give a little bit more info on himself and his background. Todd, can you introduce yourself and tell us how you got into doing what you're doing today?
Sure. It's good to see you again, Kelly. For about 20 years, I was working in the psychological field, working at psychiatric hospitals, doing therapy, different types of psychological work like that, and as faculty. And I had a friend, his name is Chad Hattrup, and he and I used to spend a lot of time together. And he was a business development person who did consulting at Boeing and worked with some tech startups. And in his consulting role, he would ask me these questions like, this person who can't work with this person because of this or these different scenarios. And I, from my background, I'd be like, oh, that's because this person's paranoid. And this one's a narcissist. And they're fighting because the paranoid person wants the narcissist to tell the truth, and the narcissist wants the paranoid to, see the flaws and not try to be perfect. And so because he's working with the paranoid, if the paranoid goes and acts this way with this other person, things will get a lot better. So Chad would go and work with these companies and kind of share this information, and things would turn around pretty quickly. So, a month later, we're having a beer in the hot tub, and he, pounds me with about 3 more questions. And I say, well, that's because this person's schizoid and this person's And so after this went on for a couple months, the two of us, again, drinking beers, I'm sure, looked at each other and said, we should start a company that does this. So about 20 years ago, we started Pathwise from scratch, left our jobs, built this thing almost entirely by word of mouth. And we've now worked with about 3,000 senior leaders, founders of crypto, all the way to tech fellows at Microsoft and everything across the board, teaching them basically how to understand from a psychoanalytic perspective kind of who they are and who they're dealing with, and then the hacks in order to better relate to people and kind of get what you need from them.
Maybe. Thank you, Todd. You mentioned some personality types. Not disorders. We go styles, personality styles.
Styles or types, anything but disorders, because these are people who are not diagnosed. But there's in the DSM 4, 5, 6, there's personalities that are talked about that have been around for about 100 years. So it's the same that's used by psychiatrists and psychologists around the world. It's the real thing.
Can you, for those that don't know, can you share what the DSM is?
It's the psychiatric manual for mental stuff. So what psychiatrists use is sort of diagnose. And there's Axis 1, which is I can be depressed or anxious, or a whole list of things. And then there's Axis 2, which are personality styles. And only when somebody kind of can't get out of bed for a long time or really is not functioning very well in the world that it is a disorder. And for higher functioning people like you and I, and probably most of your audience, it's just a way that the human being takes in information, processes it, and then acts on it. And it's clearly in these patterns. And so knowing that at our high functioning level lets us know how to interact
with our founders at different events and offsites. There's a variety of different let's call them personality or organization analysis tools, features, whether it's a Myers-Briggs test, a DISC assessment, a mapping of strengths, weaknesses on a team dynamic. Why is understanding personality styles like you've described more interesting and more a more nuanced approach than some of the other stuff that's out there when you think about business leadership or founder leadership?
Yeah, all those different approaches are great. I mean, as an undergrad in college, I studied and took many of those things, and it helped me become more psychologically minded. I would say that those are, a bit of is a too strong of a word, but those are outgrowths of what's actually used by psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists, which is these other personality types that I'm talking about. So when you use a word like narcissist or schizoid or manic depressive, those have meaning, I guess, in our culture, mostly because of how they're portrayed and used in film and TV nowadays. So typecasting is very much related to these. And so you have these characters on TV, and so Hannibal Lecter's a psychopath. And we think of things under those terms. But those terms have been around for, building for about 100 years on how people function and how to help people grow. And so the real terms are great, but they sound not so great. So a lot of other psychologists have come around and turned those terms into things like butterflies or red, blue, green, or introvert judging. And those are great, but they're not the ones that are used. They're not the real things, so to speak.
All right, personality types and styles. And from personal experience, I'll say that none of them are good. You don't really want to be any of them. And sometimes it's really hard to figure out which you are. I think you've seen this, Todd, right? That like you're the last person to see what's wrong with you or what your personality type is or how you're acting or the number of personalities that come out of you. Can you give a couple, for someone that's never been exposed to any of this, can you give a little bit of an overview of how these personality styles are kind of formed and what they are?
Yeah. I mean, help me drill down into specifics in a little bit. But in general, people always wonder if personality is genetics or environment. That's like a first question. And it's a combination of both. Genetics definitely have a predisposition, and it's about 50-50. So when you see a little kid who's 2, 3, 4 years old and they're playing, that kind of is the kid. That's the genetics acting out into the world. But then those genetics sort of hit the environment. They hit mom and dad and school, and the adaptation of those genetics to the environment begin to be what is called personality. And some people who think that it's just genetics, basically what helps is twin studies, where exact identical twins have different personalities, more than 50% of the time. And it's not just environment, because genetics definitely loads people in sort of different directions. So the brain basically is born, and it has a structure, and then it takes in the impact of how it's fitting in the world, and it tries to do it as well as it can. And those become patterns. And the way that I kind of explain it sometimes is, imagine flying over North America, I think 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. And you'd have some, basic fires here and there, probably native people. And then you have the Europeans come over and they move into the East Coast a little bit. They start building these little towns. They start building these roads, often on these native trails. And slowly they incur into North America and build more towns, and they come around to the West Coast and do the same. And that building up between towns to each other, these roads become, over time, highways and superhighways. And your brain is kind of like that. You're born with these sort of genetic structures, like mountains and lakes and rivers in North America. But over time, these neurons and neural pathways, which are the cities and the roads, begin to build, to become stronger where they're more used, and not really active in places that are not used. So when you fly over North America now, you see the structure of cities and highways, especially at night. Our brain is like that. It's not a black box that magic happens in. It's actually a well mapped out thing. And that building of those neural pathways comes from the interaction of the genetics with the environment.
Genetics and the environment have effectively have been the mapping and building of those.
Of those personalities, yeah. Which just means that, like, some people ask, well, can I change my personality?
Yeah.
Well, at our age, if you're 30 plus, no, you can grow. You can
That's
definitely
the
develop.
cutoff is 30. Cutoff
Well,
30.
it's earlier than that, but I don't want to get into specifics. But yeah, exactly. So our it's kind of like, you see the neural pathway, you see the connections of the cities and highways in North America. You can't just become, South America. It's a different network. I mean, in North America, we can build new cities and new connections. There's plasticity, but you're not going to rework the whole thing unless you basically, the whole thing crashes. I suppose if you have brain damage, things can happen. If you went and lived in a cult for 20 years, they may be able to like rewire you, but I wouldn't recommend either of those. So kind of what we got is what we got. But it can improve so we like to use Keegan from, Harvard, and he talks about developmental stages. So like people can act like children, can act like young adults, and can act like adults within their brain. You can actually put brain monitoring stuff and see people's psychological age as it moves up and down in a day, both you and I. And the goal is to be in the higher functional states more often, because it's the lower functional states that we would call, if somebody lived there all the time, kind of more disordered.
More disordered, also meaning lesser functioning.
Yeah. So like think of a baby. A little child basically needs to be taken care of, fed, cleaned. And there are adult members of society that live like that, usually in caretaking facilities, hospitals, and their brain functioning states is actually fairly parallel with children, with infants. And then you have people who are a little bit older and can only be selfish, like a kid is. And that's great and functional in many ways, but it limits other things like abstract reasoning and abstract feelings. So somebody who only acts like the example would be soccer. The kid who just is only caring about kicking the ball but can't pass it is kind of like the kid. And then eventually they learn to pass it. And then eventually they learn to think about, oh, there's a soccer game and people, and how do I strategize their movement? So there's like 3 different levels of thinking. And any personality can think at those sort of 3 levels. So there's no limit to thinking. It's within a type.
What is the most important thing someone needs to know about their own mapping of their mind to be as high functioning as possible?
You can almost break that down into 2 parts. So the first part is that if you went to school, if you had parents and went to school and then maybe some college and you've had some jobs and you've worked with clients, there's probably a pattern. Like especially the people who really knew you and cared about you, there's a pattern that you do in each of those situations. And for most of us, those patterns work great. But let's say 10 or 20% of the time, those patterns get in the way. The thing is that we don't see that. Like everybody around me, if you have a partner or a spouse, and you ask them, hey, what's the one thing that I do constantly that annoys you? They would tell you. And most of the time, we don't see ourselves do those things. It's like in the unconscious. We're all humans. We all do those things. And sometimes we do them and they get in our way. So the first piece is to develop a capacity of self-awareness in the moment as it's happening, that, oh, right now I'm doing that thing. Because then you can choose to keep doing it or not. So that's the first piece. And we can see it in everybody else. We can complain about everybody around us, and we know their patterns. It's just somehow we magically believe we don't. The second piece, and then I will leave that to have more conversation. So the second piece is to go up these brain functional states requires 2 things, which is kind of contradictory and interesting. So the first is, if you have a childhood that is only horrible and no support around you, it's abusive, it's whatever, and all these things you can imagine, and you never have a mentor, you never have somebody who sort of supported you, a grandmother, it's going to tend that you're going to be stuck at the lower functioning level. It's going to be really hard, and it's possible, but it's very hard. And then there's another layer, which is if you grew up and everything has been, it's exaggerated, but been easy, easy school, easy childhood, everything's easy. Your brain has the capacity to function at a higher level than if it was always horrible.
Why is that? Wouldn't you had challenges to overcome if you had like a tough start? Or is it just an exposure thing?
Well, no, so that's the third thing. So if we ranked it like bottom and then middle and then top and then these functional levels, the top one, all the research in general shows that those who've had really hard things happen in their life, really hard things, and have had support and have had people around them that trusted them, or that the combination of those two, if they utilize that to overcome the challenge, those are the highest functioning people. Like that requires these very high. So I am a kid, life is really hard, I'm hurt. I have a coach or a mentor that really kind of supports me. And I abstract reason, I go, I need to get out of here. I need to make something of my life. I need to overcome the poverty that I've grown up in and the neighborhood, the difficulties so I'm gonna, and I see that it's possible if I go and build a company, or if I go to college, whatever it is, my abstract goal. And so that abstraction is required to get out of the difficulty. And as I go towards that goal, I actually build these higher brain functional states. So entrepreneurs, in a way, the challenges in front of them, if they overcome them from a psychological perspective, move into these higher functional states. You can't have those states handed to you. You actually have to struggle to build those capacities.
If you're a founder that hasn't had that, we have founders that come from all walks of life in crypto, some that were very well educated at very difficult to get into schools, some that bootstrapped things from the bottom up, some that found themselves with a bunch of funding early on. If you haven't had to overcome massive challenges to get things to a level footing where you can kind of go from, what advice do you have to getting to that higher level? And then I think the other question is, why should people want to strive to get to that level? Like, what's the difference? I'm functioning, I can manage my team, everybody's generally happy, things are generally going where they are. I'm an engineer, so I can sort out this problem and that problem. I'm okay enough with dealing with people, so I can do this. But what should be the driver in being able to get to that higher level of functioning?
Imagine that you've got this company, you've got 10 employees, and it's starting to scale. And then you have a CEO, so she's in charge of this. If she's in the part of her brain that acts like a baby, you can see that she's not going to be very good at running that company. If she's acting like a young child only, she's going to be a little bit better, but not so much. If she's functioning at this level where she can kind of get along with people and can build relationships internally and with clients, that's another level. And if she can abstract reason and strategize both herself and where the company needs to go, then she can function at another level. So psychological age is incredibly valuable in outcomes. What's also interesting is there's a combination of two factors that push us any higher functioning person down. And that's the combination of ambiguity and stress, which I'm sure your founders are aware of.
Yeah, let's double click on those. Yeah.
So ambiguity and stress together at the same time is what turns adults into children, or And the example is, it's not just ambiguity. So imagine, Kelly, that you inherited $5 billion and you had to go move to Paris and you didn't speak French. So lots of ambiguity, but not a lot of stress. You'd be like, oh, I'll figure it out.
I'll learn French for that amount of money. It's fine.
Yes, yeah. Now imagine that, just stress, and you're really good at what you do. And now imagine that you instead of it being done in a week, you have to do it in 3 days. If it's something you know how to do and you're good at, the stress in the short term can actually have you function at a little bit higher level. Middle term to long term, it could it's harder because there's burnout, but in the short term, research shows you'll actually function better. But if it's due in 3 days and you don't know how to do it, it's unclear what needs to be done, those pressures push down brain function. they turn adults into teenagers into children, and if it's bad for long enough, it turns them all into babies, hiding under the cover. And so we are constantly striving to go up, and these ambiguity and stress is pushing us down. And the only real leverage we have as adults is a combination of sort of self-awareness and then presence. So self-awareness can see, okay, right now things are hard. And then instead of regressing and having the brain shut down, attempting to be present and in the moment, mindful, so not on autopilot, but really here, is a muscle that can be built, that can withstand and be resilient against this regression in age.
Does that in and of itself become a wearing down burnout factor? Always having to like stay present and stay on and like be completely self-aware. Because what you're explaining, like the ambiguity and the stress, totally fits with a lot of people in crypto. There's a lot of nuance to the ways people are going to market, and things are shifting, and the mechanics of engaging with audiences are shifting. None of the old models work at all. Everything gets thrown out. Everything's done from scratch, and people are getting super creative. And I have such admiration for everyone in the space that's doing all that stuff and doing things that have never been done before at rapid pace. So you've got the ambiguity, you've got challenges overcoming those things, you've got the stress of timing. There's so much going on. The space is moving so quickly. To your point, and I loved how, if it's something you know how to do, you can do it in 3 days and you'll actually function higher, right? I feel like there's a lot of people in Web3 that work well under pressure, and that's part of the game. But to your point of being able to be present and self-aware constantly to overcome the ambiguity and the stress, is that part in and of itself a burnout, or is there a way to stay self-aware and present and in the moment and functioning at a high level without becoming completely exhausted and just having it be like another thing you have to think about on a regular basis?
Yeah, it's kind of a mix of all that. So it's interesting. So I have to start off with authentic pessimism. So the first one is the amount of time the average human being is present in a day is like 1%. You think about
24 hours in a day, we're only really present for 1% on average, humans.
Much less. But I don't want to be that pessimistic. Most of the time we're on autopilot. We're just sort of, we know what we're doing, we just do it and it's done. Whether we're driving somewhere or coding or going into a meeting, most people don't want to hear that. The second piece is that we want to think of presence as a light switch that we turn on and off. And it's much more like a muscle. It's much more like something like going to the gym and you exercise and you get stronger. So maybe right now an average person can maybe be present for a few moments or 10 minutes a day, let's say. And with exercise, we can get up to, let's say, an hour a day. So anyone who imagines their presence all day is probably not really aware of that themselves in the moment. But we can 100x the amount of time that we're present in the day because we're starting at such a low number. And then it's where do you apply the presence? So there's parts of the day where you can just push it out, get it done, not really think about it. And there's parts of the day where really you don't need to be high functioning thinking and present. You're just having fun with your friends, or you're, doing a sales presentation that you're good at. It's those moments where it's important because the person you're sitting with is important. The decision you're making is important. These really leveraged moments in a day is the ones we really need to show up for, and they have dramatic impact. And I do want to put in a little bit that taking this outside of work, so people you spend time with in your life, whether it's your partner, spouse, or friend, or kids, there's moments there too that are leverageable. You come home, you've been traveling. This happened to me, traveling internationally for weeks, and you have your 5-year-old girl comes running at you with joy as you come home, and you're just so exhausted and just overwhelmed. All you want to do is put your bags away, and you're not really able to show up for her. I didn't crush up myself doing that once with my child, and it was kind of one of the best things that happened to me for our relationship, because I didn't want that to happen again. I wanted to be there in that moment that she wanted to connect. And so I learned how to come home, get prepared, go and meet her and give her everything I had for even 2 minutes. And it kind of changed everything. So a bit of self-awareness, and then this muscle of being able to be present in these leveraged moments.
I've partaken in Pathwise courses. They're like 2.5, 3 hours long. So now you're saying that, that's a stretch for the muscle. You just want us to have strong muscles right out of the gate.
Yep, it's set up as a gym.
Yeah, we're big fans of the gym. What's your advice to people listening on how to practice working that muscle?
Most of us in technology and in finance in these areas, we're pretty intelligent people. And we all think we are our thinking. But that's our identity. But what's interesting to deconstruct is that thinking is abstract reasoning is a brilliant activity. Logic is a brilliant activity. But our sense of identification changes. An example would be is like little kids are figuring out how to use their hands, and they're much connected to just their bodies, and then they start to crawl. And their whole identity is not about thinking and feeling yet. It's all about this body that I have. And what's also interesting about that is they're using a lot of brainstem activity, and the brainstem processes all the data from the body real time. So little children, just to make this clear, are very present. The brain keeps developing, and kids develop, and we go to the next stage, and let's say we get little older kids, like 5-year-olds, have emotions. They scream and they cry and they try to get stuff. And around 8 or 9-ish, they start to think that they are their emotions. They identify it. So they're not just having these emotions. They're like, I am this love I have for my friends. I am my emotions. And they start to not necessarily only be their bodies. This is sort of who they are. So when I'm mad, and then eventually we start to think logically and abstractly, and that happens, maybe 10, 11-ish, let's say, for today. And all of a sudden I start thinking, and I go, if I do this, I get that. If I follow this algorithm, I go there. And now I start to think that I'm like thinking. And so the human ego, and this is good and fine, but basically thinks that it is whatever the coolest thing the brain can do. And our ego doesn't realize that we aren't just our thinking, but we are also our feeling, and we are also these bodies that we have. And so if I ignore the body sitting in this chair looking at, the camera right now, if my body's not here, I can't be present. So I have to have some awareness of the information that's coming to my brainstem, that's processing real data. And that's the only way to be grounded in the present. Otherwise, I think I am my thinking. And what's interesting about thinking, if you think about it, is that the thinking is always taking whatever information is available and projecting it into the future. It's taking whatever is and trying to think about what's possible. So there's a problem at work. How do I solve it? I've got this data. How do I get it to turn into this data? I've got this relationship, and if I think about it, how do I make it better in this way? It's all taking what's known and moving it into the future. And so all the time, if we're only in our heads, don't know that we have bodies. If we're only in our heads, we're just off in the future. We're off in somewhere else, which is great, but it's not grounded in right now. And it's possible to be thinking and present. But it's also possible just to be thinking. And let me add one other thing real quick, Kelly, before I see you. Emotions are interesting too. So emotions, if pull us into the past. So let's say you and I are having this conversation. At the end of it, you insult me somehow, and my feelings get hurt. So now I'm mad. Like, why is Kelly? She seems nice and brilliant. And like, why was she so mean? And I go on to my next meeting. If I'm still mad at you, that emotion is going to color my next meeting. So that's the past affecting the present, where thinking alone is the future and not the present. And so as a human being, what I need to do is to be able to be aware of my thinking and my feeling, and that I am in my body. And so having a sensation of my body's in this chair immediately brings me present. And as I continue to practice this very strange effort, people who go to yoga, people who do extreme skiing, people who train the body to do stuff, in those trainings, they're moving the mind to focus on the body, and that attention allows them to be present. So that's the muscle Pathwise develops. It's how to be present right now while talking to a camera.
That's fascinating, especially on the part where all of these things are supposed to be making us think about the future, which is, I think, what most people in this space are doing, constantly think about how to improve things or improve their business or to do something different tomorrow than they did today. What is the impact of thinking through those challenges today, right now, in the present, instead of tomorrow, right? Like, what's the like, how do you think about quantifying like the benefit of that, right? And what I'm trying to do is stress the importance of like being there and being present for it and having a more important conversation now than immediately jumping to, oh, so I'm going to do that tomorrow, right? And I don't know how to think about that or how to emphasize that for our listeners.
Yeah, so try to extrapolate this out into other scenarios, but this would be a very simple scenario. So I'm working with a partner business client, and stuff's going sideways, and important relationship to me. So I'm already emotionally up a little bit, but then I'm projecting like what's the possible solutions, and I'm in my head, which is good. Again, it's not bad. It's good. My client is sharing with me information in the moment in our conversation that's incredibly relevant to solving the problem. And if I'm just in my head with my own calculations and sort of stressed about this relationship, I could not be present and I could not hear that data that's going to solve the problem. So going into our head is great. There's nothing wrong with it. But if I'm in a situation where the present moment is giving me what I need to act on, and I'm not there for it,
You completely miss it.
You completely miss it. And I think that happens a lot more than people swear every day.
Can we shift a little bit and talk about team dynamics? You mentioned a minute ago the emotional reaction or shadow that hangs over you frequently comes from the past. And, you know, I could say something that sends you into another meeting following this where you're not as excited, or the interactions we have with each other shift our moods and our emotions moving into other things. How important is that, and what the impact of others, and how to sort of think about that? What advice can we give to people on that front?
Again, it's a complex response, so I guess I hope that you'll indulge me. But you could say that we all have triggers, for the good and the bad. We all have triggers. The whole brain is this whole network, and it's all wired out. And somebody pushes one button and we go down one wire. Somebody pushes another button and then we go down another wire. And all of that can happen automatically. In fact, it does, and unconsciously mostly. Like, I can compliment you, Kelly, like that is the coolest hat I've ever seen. And a whole set of internal psychological reactions are happening inside of you. Where I could say, oh, no, I can't really read your hat that well. And there's a whole nother set of reactions. And those are very surface level ones. But we have these super highways in us that have been built since childhood. And we, again, see them in everybody else. We don't see them in ourselves. And in psychoanalysis, it's called transference and countertransference, the name for sort of these mappings or these stories that we have. And those mappings, again, are a combination of genetics and environment. So let's say I'm a young kid and I'm really active and just want to make my way in the world, and I'm excited about it. And mom's there, mom's busy, and dad's not around. I'm going to have lots of room to go and do my own thing. And if that is sort of encouraged, it flourishes. But every time I come into somebody who tells me no, whether it's an elementary school teacher or a funder or anybody that tells me no, it's automatically going to push this button where I'm going to react. I'm going to try to ignore them. I'm going to try to go past them. And in that moment, I'm completely not present.
And that's because you're not used to hearing that.
Yeah, you've had this pattern of doing it all on your own. And that's great. But life is full of lots of no's. So how do you be present? Somebody tells you no, and you stay present enough so you can hear why there's a no, so that you can solve the problem and turn it into a yes. But if you're triggered and you're on your path and it's like you've already lost the opportunity. There's an example like going through the personalities just really shortly. So the button, let's say, and there's algorithms for all this and how to build relationships, and I don't want to go too far or too fast, but just enough to when somebody who has a psychopathic personality, which somebody like Steve Jobs maybe did, but also, has lots of people in the prisons have that. When their button's pushed, they have to omnipotent control everything around them because it's all the way, the force of it is survival. So if I have that personality, I want to know that in the sense that there's some moments where I'm going to have to give up that control. Or if I'm working with somebody who's like that, I need to know how to manage that. Somebody like me, schizoid, so it's embarrassed to say, but it's life. If I get triggered, I want to go hide. If it's schizoid, if a narcissist gets triggered, they need people to compliment them. They're just begging for people to compliment them. Obsessive compulsive gets triggered, they go try to manage more stuff and take on more stuff and often can make it worse. So there's these very clear triggers that these personalities have that, again, we see in all the people around us, but probably aren't as aware about it ourselves.
Yeah, I'd love to go a little bit deeper. I think it'd be really interesting just on the understanding the triggers and how others work and think. My personal story, I've always worked with a lot of narcissists, and they enjoy the information and the narrative and storytelling. And at one point worked with more of a paranoid personality type and started explaining all these things in my lengthy way of expressing whatever we were about to do or whatever I was about to do. And at one point the response was, I stopped listening to you 5 minutes ago. Todd, I think you were the one that had to explain to me with paranoid personality type, less is more. Like, this is it, and that is it. They don't need the long version. They need the less is more version. You get to the point and then move on.
Yep. Yeah, they need something sort of, they need to know the structure. And what's also interesting about people with that personality is their whole thing is to find flaws, like why it's not going to work, testing everybody around them to see who they can trust and who not sure. It's like what they do constantly. I remember teaching Pathwise like 18 years ago, and I'd had a couple people in the class, because it's usually a group of 10 people, and they'd have this personality. And so these ideas would come out, and then they just start poking at them. And sometimes they poke viciously, and sometimes and I used to be offended in the beginning. I'd be like, I'd have to defend these psychoanalysts. Like, I don't need to do all these things. And eventually it's like, I'm like, yeah, you think that's bullshit? It kind of might be, actually. Or that it's like just to validate the possibility that there's error, to validate that also, and to not take it personally. Also, that like that personality type in my classes became one of my favorite because they're sparring to build friendship. And it's interesting. So they're in the transference, that's their transference, or that's their way of being in the world. The countertransference that the paranoids don't know is everybody around them feels like they're getting poked and want to walk away or want to defend themselves. So part of Pathwise, in a sense, is, well, what do you do when somebody pokes you? Or what do you do when somebody wants to give you a lot of information? What do you want to do?
That's a great question, right? We probably have we have some of those, but like somebody's continuing to poke, like, what do you do there, right? And there's a lot of questioning that goes on. And I think it's not always personality types that's driving a lot of the questioning, and just it's a very nuanced early stage space. But taking this particular example, is like, what's the response there? How do you figure out, and I guess, how do you figure out how to best work with these different personality types?
Well, the paranoids won't like this, but you take Pathwise. But anyways, Pathwise Leadership. But anyways, but for that personality type, so each of the personalities there's an algorithm that you apply, and an algorithm in the sense that if you keep doing it, it always works and gets the same result with the data. So I'll do a storytelling to sort of hide the secret of this. But so I grew up in California in the Bay, and I'm imagining born in 1970. So in 1980, I'm 10 years old. I'm in elementary school. There's a soccer field. Kids are playing soccer at recess, and I'm waiting my turn to go out. I'm next. And so this has gender and all kinds of issues around it. But so I'm waiting, and then all of a sudden, some kid comes up to me, my size or whatever, and just literally goes, "Your mom is so fat. She's the fattest," and just like a couple fat jokes. Just a random kid I've never met just starts poking at my mom. What is the only solution to that problem back in 1980? If you're a boy in California,
Are you punching someone?
no. So that's one reaction. Some people would punch them. Well, the kid who's poking, who let's say is paranoid because they're often poked, is testing me. So if I punch him, the kid goes, "Yeah, I knew this guy was like a jerk out to get me. I don't know why, but that's how they think." Well, the other scenario is I walk away, and the other parent kid goes, "Yeah, he'll get me later. Shit, I got another one kind of plotting to get me." So the only solution, and people are often shocked by this, the only solution is to turn around, look at the kid, and say, "Your mom's fatter," and hit him with some other jokes. Or you can say, "Yeah, my mom is fat. She's so fat, she blah, 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 blah." But basically, you have to poke back or continue the joke at the same intensity. And all of a sudden, that kid will be your best friend. And paranoids may not like this algorithm going out to the world, but this is what happens in therapy with a therapist. This happens all around the world. The people who poke you back are the ones you like. Or if they so that's the algorithm for that type.
Okay, let's do one more. I don't want to go through the whole set, but these are fun.
Yeah.
Let's do schizoid.
Oh, you want to throw myself under the bus?
I didn't really mean that for you. I was thinking it'd be a more interesting one.
Yeah. So schizoids, they all have ideologies. So they all have patterns of childhood that their model of personality sort of help them flourish. And so theoretically, my childhood would be such that things were sort of overwhelming, and it could be overwhelming bad or overwhelming good. But it's like people were trying to get into my space, and so that personality type wants to be alone or hide, and they hide by literally hiding or getting space, or they hide up into their head. They sort of like think about stuff as a way of hiding. And so if you run into a schizoid who, more than a third of engineers are probably much more than a third of engineers are schizoid, or obsessive compulsive, those two. Some of the paranoids, but you have one of these and you see them, you're walking around Silicon Valley and you see somebody who's kind of a little shy and awkward. And, by the way, I'm so excited Revenge of the Nerds came out when I was a kid, because I think that and technology, all of a sudden it's cool to be nerdy.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't early, but it became cool. So you have this kind of awkward kid, me. I could even play this with you, Kelly. Let's say you and I, we're hanging out. We're like in our 20s or something, and I'm kind of nerdy. And you come and you see me, and for some reason you and I, you want to talk to me. You're interested in this thing I'm doing or something. And so I could do hand puppets. It makes it funner. So here's me. Here's you. I have a bubble. And I might be attracted to you or not, or whatever. It doesn't matter. But there's this bubble. And if you come to my bubble and then so, "Hey, Todd, how are you doing?" I will go, "I'm okay." And then you're like, "Okay, let's have a normal human conversation. Let's hang out." Okay. And pretty soon you can kind of chase me around. So schizoids basically have a bubble, and if you go in it, they reestablish it. The other thing that people do with schizoids with the hand puppet is you get so bored, you just ignore them. Because eventually it's like you can't make that human contact. And so the algorithm with schizoids is you find the boundary and you hang out at the boundary. And right when you like, come on, man, hang out, or you just want to leave, you stay a little longer. And eventually what happens is the schizoid turns to you and shortens the space and then creates a bond. And schizoids are so loyal that one move once can last years. Like suddenly you're in their circle. So the algorithm with schizoids is give them space and have them come to you, and they're loyal.
A lot of times people are very remote. We see each other at larger events and gatherings, but generally speaking, teams are dispersed. And so I think it's really important to understand the team dynamic and the team personality. I think a lot of these things still hold true, but it's not necessarily an in-person, it's a remote thing. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of team dynamics and working together? Is it better if everybody's a schizoid? Is it better if everyone's a narcissist? Or should there be a blend when you have these very small early stage teams?
It's definitely better to have a mix. I would say I went on vacation once to Cabo with 4 schizoids, and it was the most boring vacation of laziness that even I was destroyed by it. And then a mad depressive friend of mine came, and it became really fun. So yeah, it definitely needs to be diverse. So the way that you look at it from sort of a pathwise or analytic perspective is a team is a system when it's functioning at its best. One way of looking at it is a system is a bicycle. So if you have a bicycle, if everything's handlebars, it's not a bicycle. If everything's seats, it's not. If you have a seat and a handlebar only. So you need these different pieces. And the different pieces are interesting because they're actually in tension with one another. So you've got one part that's cranking the cranks that create speed, but then you've got brakes, like the paranoids that are stopping it. And then you've got cranks and building the speed, and you've got the handlebars, the narcissist, which is diverting it some direction, right? And then you've got the frame, which holds it together, but nobody thinks the frame gives the frame enough respect, but it's operations of whole. So you need all these different parts. And it's the same in human systems, that you need a diversity of psychotypes. And then the types that are needed, the mix, are derivative from what the product is, what the people who are purchasing that product want. So if it's a creative product, you might have a system that leads towards a certain grouping of types in one way. If you have, in crypto, there's probably a different leaning of people in a different way. So, or in large companies, you could even have areas of the company that are of different makeups, but they need to match what the product is. So operations is going to tend to be more obsessive compulsives. Engineering is going to tend to be more engineer, obsessive compulsives and schizoids. And so you have to think about that diversity and those tensions of people getting mad at each other. If directed the right way, those are creative tensions to create a system that's high functioning.
A lot of the things that we've talked about today, understanding personalities, transference, countertransference, being present, should those be practiced and worked on individually or as a team?
There's benefits to both. So even within Pathwise, there's like 2 options. Like people don't use that just as a story, not a selling thingy. So people can come in as intact teams, or people can come in individually in a group of 10 people that don't know each other. The benefit of the 10 people you don't know is you can say anything and there's no impact, right? But it's free in that sense. But the thing is if you go in alone and then you go home or go back to work, nobody else knows what the hell you're talking about. So you read these cool things, and you can maybe vouch for me, Kelly, like everyone starts applying these, but then nobody knows what the heck you're talking about. So there's not. The other way is an intact team comes through Pathwise, and it's harder because, especially if the leader's in the room, which was how we usually do it, because you have to be a little more cautious of what you say, and there's a slower building up. But one of the gestalts we have is we have a lot of these teams that want to be high functioning teams, one of those teams you remember for the rest of your life you were on, kind of thing. Pathwise kind of helps teams get there. So it builds that trust and that intensity and drive. But in the beginning, we have to navigate what you share. The helpful part is that everybody starts talking about it. Everyone has the same tools, and it 10x's the experience. And then you even have whole teams go in to work with other teams, and it's like they're, they're special forces. They have this language and going, oh, we need to do this with this person and that person, and so they both have different advantages. I don't know. I think it depends on the person, what, and their situation, which is better.
Thank you. Todd, this has been super helpful. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. And I'll put in the show notes more information on Pathwise and some of the programs that you guys offer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.